You are listening to Lone Star Community Radio on 104.5 KCZW LP Conroe and 106.1 KZCC LP Conroe and worldwide on irlonestar.com.
Good afternoon and welcome to the Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl. Tony and I are here today. You can listen to us from 12 to 1 on 104.5 and 106.1 in Conroe, Texas. We are two Texas licensed attorneys, Tony Lynn Collins and Cheryl Ellsworth Jahani, and we are here to answer your legal questions. You can, during the show, this show is pre-recorded, but you can message us when it's played on Facebook Messenger, and we'll get back to you. As soon as we can, we try to pull that up and answer questions and stuff like that. So we'll get back with you. But today, we want to wrap up our discussion about divorce from a woman's perspective or from the perspective of the party that's not the breadwinner. And so this is our fourth show on divorce. We want to say we're looking forward to the holidays, and we know this may not be the most festive topic, but Tony, I really think a lot of people in divorce in the holiday times they're going through a divorce. I have a lot of clients that are going through divorce right now, and they feel alone and angry or whatever. And
based on the research that I've done and then our own experience, I know a lot of people that have been through so many divorces. It's just common, it's on their calendar. Divorce during the holiday season.
Right.
That way they can be with their girlfriends, boyfriends,
whoever they want.
The party is with their next squeeze. Yeah, unfortunately, that's pretty true. Mm-hmm. And also what happens, like in the case we're going to discuss, sometimes infidelity starts during some of these parties and social events.
Oh, that's so true, isn't it?
It's like, just like we were discussing before, trust is the most important thing in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't take much for people with insecurities, or maybe if there's not a good solid foundation in the relationship, for it to turn bad very quickly.
Right.
And I'll just give a little taste before I wanted to get into the court order of spousal maintenance in Texas and some of the legal, I guess a roadmap to when you get it and what you need to do to secure what you should get as a spouse that can't needs to be in the same position that you're in during the process of divorce with spousal maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
In order to secure that, what you need to do. So we're going to go into that a little bit, but we're going to talk about the to be continued what we did in our last segment, the Rachel Michael Brown divorce,
right?
And just a little what happened with them, to give a little bit of a heads up.
Mm-hmm.
When I was reading about this particular case, I had actually gotten interested in it because I was in a criminal case in the 263rd back in, I can't remember what year it was, but it was during that case when I was just in there doing some hearings and what have you. They had taken a break during the trial of the Michael Brown assault trial. Rachel Brown had accused him of assaulting her during their marriage, and I was watching this trial. And what I learned was that what the catalyst for it is that Michael Brown had, and I don't know, we'd give a little background on him. Michael Brown is a hand surgeon. He was born around 1960, roughly. He grew up in Galena Park. He went to Galena Park High School, got into medical school because he watched Dr. DeBakey do heart surgery in junior high, and that's what he wanted to do, and ended up doing hand surgery.
Right.
He was kind of quoting in an article saying he changed over to hand surgery because he said it was more lucrative and more glamorous. I don't know how hand surgery could be more glamorous, but he said it was.
Right.
And he ended up going to, I think, medical school at up in Dallas. Not really sure where he went to medical school, but he got his medical license, and then went forward and started his career in hand surgery,
Mm-hmm.
which is sort of an odd thing. Most people think they want to be family doctor or whatever, but that was his gig.
Mm-hmm.
And he ultimately was married 4 times. His fourth wife was Rachel Spinahill. I think I'm not sure how many times she was married. It was hard to find information on her. But I believe her name was Rachel Joy Haddock if I put all the marriages in it. Haddock, Spinahill, Brown, Bagwell. So she was married 4 times also. But I might be incorrect on that. For sure, she was married to a Brown, to Dr. Brown, and then later to Jeff Bagwell, who
Right.
we talked about was a Houston Astro and renowned around the Houston area and that kind of thing. And they're still married now. And in the social page, if you Google Jeff Bagwell and Rachel Bagwell, they will come up. And I'll have a little picture. I don't know if we can. I think we showed this before. Where is our camera today? Let's see, can you see that? Is that too far away? Let's see here. Okay, you can see that. That was in the paper about 2 weeks ago, and that is Jeff Bagwell and Rachel Bagwell and their 5 kids together. And if you look at it, and you can pull this up just by Googling it, the picture comes up because it was his 50th birthday party. All the kids now have the Bagwell last name, but the father, Bagwell's not the father of any of these children, to my knowledge.
None of those are his children?
It looks maybe Blake and Bryce are, but Rachel is his wife. Raquel is not. Raquel is Jeff Michael Brown's child. Lauren Bagwell is her child from a marriage before Brown that she had with a guy named Shannon Reedy, who they weren't married, and she had to go to the office of the Attorney General to get the child support and all that stuff, and that was back in 2001, I want to say. And then Maxwell Bagwell is the only son of Dr. Brown and Rachel Brown, and so he must have adopted them after Michael Brown
Right.
allegedly committed suicide. So on November 13th, it is as the story goes, during all this stuff going on with their marriage, he committed suicide in Florida. But I'm a skeptic, and I don't believe he actually committed suicide. I think that he faked it, and because I'm just a skeptic, and I may be the only one in all these circles that doesn't believe that. But before we start getting into it, and we're going to talk about spouse support because she got that, and that's
Right.
going to help some of our listeners. This is a picture of Michael Brown and Rachel Brown right after they got married, and their 5 kids. Maxwell being the son that he had in 2006. So I guess it would be about 12 now. This is when he did his hand commercials, and his whole claim to fame was these hand commercials where he talked about I guess his slogan was I will treat you as well as I treat my family, and he did carpal tunnel procedures. And
Right.
so this is where we all met, Michael Brown and Rachel Brown. And I remember seeing these commercials.
Well, I'm not from Houston. I don't even
Oh, okay.
remember any of this.
Well, their first legal finagling and all of their first cases were all in Montgomery County.
right.
And when he was married to his 3rd wife, and then Rachel actually testified against him while married to him against his 3rd wife, Darlena.
So she testified against not him, but his 3rd wife.
Right, as the 4th spouse, she had brought a post judgment child custody support action against him. She already had custody, but she wanted more child support after he was making a ton of money, and that was up here in the 410th court. And Rachel actually testified against her, but later Rachel was using the attorney that Darlena used because she liked that he was really rough against her. I guess difficult, not rough, but. She thought that he was very aggressive, I suppose, and she later hired him. So that kind of ties into this whole sort of J.R. Ewing kind of thing that was going on. Now, that all being said, what we're going to do is we're going to give you a roadmap of how Rachel fared in her divorce proceedings against Michael Brown, and how successful she was. But ultimately, I think Michael Brown may have won in the end because of what he did, so she couldn't get his money, which is what we're talking about. That's what happens. That's what a lot of our listeners want to know is when you've got a lot of money in a divorce and things go south, what happens? Well, to get to how easily these things can go south, what happened was he had gone to a party, or he was out, and it may have been during the Christmas season, the holiday season, but I can't remember the exact times. She got what's called a butt dial, and it was on her cell phone where he is flirting with another woman, and she hears it.
Mhm.
And this is only about maybe 3 years into their marriage. I think it was about 2006, perhaps. And they were married in 2002. And she had just had their son Maxwell, and I can't remember the exact times. All I know is that she got this butt doll, and she was furious. And he was already home,
Right.
and they were living at this time in their mansion on 9110 Memorial, and tons of servants, tons of nanny. Every kid got a nanny. There was security, Lamborghinis. We're just talking high on the hog money. That so much money you can't even imagine how much money's involved here.
Yeah.
And she confronts him about it, and he brushes her off because he doesn't want to be bothered because he's hungover or whatever.
Right.
And then they get into a fight over this phone call. And there's allegation. She's now alleging that, how dare you cheat on me, knowing full well that he probably was cheating on his third wife with her when they got married. And when she got married to Jeff Bagwell, or when the divorce was going down, she was dating Jeff Bagwell. So
Right.
there's a lot of this going on. So the allegations seem silly because they all know each other's character.
Right.
This is what they are. This is what they do.
Yeah.
And although they try to hide it in divorce, it's all coming out in all these proceedings that I'm reading about in, so much paper that I don't even, that's why all the attorneys won in this divorce in the end. So he said that she said there was a butt doll. She alleged that he threw a humanitarian award that he received from some socialite for being a good guy and giving a lot of money to charity or whatever it was. He got it, I think maybe from Carolyn Farb, whatever. So she files assault charges against him, just like Darlena did. Okay, but we haven't gotten to that yet. But anyway, she files this assault charge against him. Ultimately, they go to trial. She loses. He was acquitted because all it was the only evidence was he twisted her arm. But they seem to be a happy couple up until that point. And that's all it took, was this one thing to change the tide.
Right.
And
The
she
butt doll call.
just the one call, when ultimately everyone said that he really loved her a lot,
Right.
and that this could have been preserved. But I think during this tension, she was leaning on the shoulder of the arm of Jeff Bagwell, who she met at a social function for the Taylor Fastari.
Maybe over the holiday.
They were doing some function just like they did. And it was in a recent article I read. They're still friends now that they're married. Jeff Bagwell and Rachel Bagwell are
Right.
friends with Fastari. As the story goes, they met each other while they were married to their other spouses.
Right.
Rachel Brown was married to Michael Brown when she met Jeff Bagwell and Erica Bagwell, and then sparks flew. And then that they weren't a couple, but at that point, at that function, that's when they started sort of leaning on each other, whatever the case may be. They are now still really good friends with the Taylor. They still do the charity functions.
Yeah.
And now it's Rachel Bagwell and Jeff Bagwell doing
Right.
charity functions.
Right.
And not even a word of all of this mudslinging that went on, as
Yeah.
though it never happened. And that
Right.
stuns me. Okay.
Yeah.
That all being said, to get into a little bit of what we need to hear, not about the juicy stuff, about all the, what happened in this case.
Right.
She was able to get spousal support. And if you read the transcripts in her legal malpractice case against her attorneys, and that's in, gosh, I can't even tell you what the case number is until I pull it up. But there are transcripts galore for all people that want to know about the inner workings of how attorneys think and why they charge what they charge, and how she ended up with an $11 million bill, and they didn't even go to trial. They never went to mediation. They never, how do you have an $11 million bill when there's no mediation? There was never any offers. There was never,
I have no idea.
there was no trial. How does the bill go that high?
Well, that's ridiculous.
Well, that's because it all gets played out in the legal malpractice case that she filed against them. And it all, you can read what all the claims were, but what it came down to was her allegation against all of her attorneys. She sued them all,
Right.
and all of her experts. And they were suing back because she didn't pay them, because Michael Brown filed bankruptcy, and then they couldn't get their money as they were getting it before through the courts automatically, which is what our clients want to know how to do. They weren't getting it because when he filed bankruptcy and he died, the money stopped. And so the moral of this story is, greed is, what is it? The love of money is the root of all evil. There's 7 deadly sins, and one of them is greed. And I think in this case, we had Rachel Brown, who really had nothing, and he was already a multimillionaire, $100 million company. And she was fighting for half of something that she walked
hadn't
into,
built.
and she
Mhm.
hadn't built. It was really his.
Mhm.
And he was not going to let go if it took him to the grave.
And
And
it
it did.
did.
It took him to the
Mhm.
grave. And he tried to stop the bleeding by filing for bankruptcy. So the divorce attorneys, her divorce attorneys, would stop taking all of his money
Right.
because her attorneys were able to get an agreement that all of the money was going to come straight from him, carte blanche, no matter who she hired or what they did. She literally says, and it's in her deposition, that she didn't even want to see the bills. I don't want to see the attorney's fees. I don't want to look at it. It bothers me. And what her attorneys did was they started hiring layers of attorneys under them without even asking her. So she ended up with a ton of attorneys that were just passing these bills through a master chancery who was also a judge, Judge, I don't pronounce his name right, but it's in all of these records. So a judge was approving the bills. So they were, quote, reasonable. But really, she was never looking at them. And the only person getting hurt by all this really was her. Because I'm going to quote some things that this attorney says, but he says basically she didn't want to see the bills, and all we were trying to do was protect her assets. But really, the malpractice attorney is saying, how are you protecting her assets when you're billing her up to $11 million? And every time you take away from the big egg, there's only one bucket of money, and that's Michael Brown making the money. As you're taking the money away from him, aren't you taking away from her? And they said, and their explanation is basically, no, we're not taking away from her if he's committing fraud by trying to hide it, because she'll get more in the long run. So their justification was, if he's hiding it, we're helping her by finding it.
Right.
But really, that wasn't justification at all, because it really
No.
wasn't hers.
No.
And so anyway, that's but we're going to talk about how she got there. And I don't know, how much time do we have in the segment? So I know 3 minutes. Okay, good. Let's go to
How she got where?
how she got to the point where she was able to get an order from this court, and not the Montgomery County Court where his first divorce proceedings had occurred with the third wife, and that's where she was introduced to these attorneys. She actually
Right.
hired the attorneys that were against Michael Brown and her for a child custody and child support battle. She hired them because she liked how aggressive they were, and they became her attorneys against him, which I thought that would be a conflict of interest, but
Mm-hmm.
they never conflicted out, which is kind of weird.
Mm-hmm.
And she ended up in the Harris County Court and was able almost immediately, and these attorneys said this is common practice in high-profile divorces, that if you're the spouse that doesn't work, and she never worked,
Right.
at least while they were married, then you're automatically going to get your attorney's fees paid, and you're going to get spousal maintenance to maintain all the security guards and to maintain the multi-billion-dollar house and memorial and the the way of life is what it amounts to. And she got it, and it was just literally they would present a $500,000 bill, and it would get Weber stamped and approved, and it would come straight from Michael Brown's assets.
So all of this was really because Michael Brown was willing. I mean, he was, in a way, he was reasonable because he didn't throw her out. He didn't starve her out. He didn't,
Yeah.
he paid
He
for
was
the
basically
kids.
like, I love you, and I've done this. This you knew. This is kind of the logic. You knew when you married me, your wife for that, and basically this is probably how he met her.
Mhm.
This is who I am. I make a lot of money. I've got 55 companies that I've created, from car leasing companies to airplane leasing companies,
Mhm.
and I don't even have a medical license anymore to do it.
Mhm.
And I go to parties, and you're here with the kids, and if you're not going to go with me, then I'm going to flirt.
Right.
And maybe going to, and she knew, and so she was willing to stop it. And if you don't stop it, I'm going to divorce you and take everything you have.
she said that.
She may not have said that exactly. I haven't gotten to that yet, but that's how it played out.
Right.
Because basically she was going after everything he had.
And so really, he was reasonable in the fact that he didn't throw her out and he didn't
No, he
starve
let her
out
stay
and
in the mansion they were in,
gave her
9110
what
Memorial.
she wanted. Yeah.
And he ended up moving to Florida and buying more mansions and more airplanes. And he started doing the hat trick where he started to move money
right.
from where he was being frozen out, because that was where his money was. He
Mhm.
was trying to keep, They were freezing him out because they were finding where his assets were. And they put a receiver in to manage his companies. And at some point he was like, I'm not going to let her have all my money while I'm making it. And she's going to take it. And the attorneys were taking it all.
Right.
So he moved the money to a different company, but they had court orders because they were attorneys that knew how to stop it.
Right.
And
they went to the
and he was
different
like, if you're going to
companies.
stop me from doing this, I'm going to file bankruptcy and I'm going to stop everything.
Right.
And so he filed bankruptcy in Florida, which was fraud because he wasn't bankrupt. They said their reason.
Okay, we need to take a break right now, Tony. I'm getting a cue. We're talking about divorce. We'll be right back after the break. The Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl, and we'll continue our discussion on divorce.
Don't forget to download the Lone Star Community Radio app for your Google Play or Apple Store. Bring Montgomery County's community radio with you anywhere with your smartphone or tablet. If you are in the Conroe area, tune in on FM. That is Conroe's FM 104.5, 106.1.
Welcome back to the Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl. Today, Tony and I are talking about divorce. It's our fourth segment, and we're going to wrap it up this time. But we're talking about the Michael and Rachel Brown divorce. And so we've been talking about the history and, what led up to the divorce and some things that happened. So, Tony, you've got, now this is Rachel Brown's attorney.
Two things. And I just want our listeners to know that I'm reading this information straight from what's in the public record. And if you are going through a really difficult divorce or it's high profile, high asset, you don't know how to hire, you don't trust your attorneys, you do trust your attorneys, you just need some background and history repeats itself, you really want to go to this case because although it may sound boring, almost everything you read is educational and something you need to know if you're ever in this position.
Right.
Even
right.
if it's just $100,000 involved, we're talking about $100 million here. The case number is 2011, which means it was filed in 2011. 01272 in Harris County. Go to the Harris County clerk site. Anybody can get access to these sites. This is all public record. Start from the beginning and just start reading forward because this started out as a fairly simple black and white divorce where it looked like it was going to be amicable. And it turned into something where the attorneys sort of took control. And then ultimately it went from the attorneys took control to a terrible divorce where there was, like 25 attorneys altogether, 17 on each side, showing up at depositions, charging $700 an hour. Only one needed to be there. Tons were there.
Yeah.
And then it parlayed into where he declared bankruptcy to stop the bleeding.
Right.
And then the bankruptcy estate took over and started selling off everything. He stopped working because he didn't want the bankruptcy attorneys to get everything, and he was the one that's generating the income. And ultimately, when he stopped working, the money stopped flowing. The bankruptcy attorneys and the people at the auctions where they were selling his assets were the people that won out. And she ultimately, the people that won out in the long run were the attorneys.
Right. And so what do you have? There's some depositions about
I found
what the attorney was thinking.
when she filed, you go to her divorce, you can follow through. You find ultimately that she sued all of her attorneys, and her lead attorney had a deposition, and all the depositions are of record in the legal malpractice case, which is also in the Harris County records. And if you just Google Rachel Brown, then you'll find the different cases that she had. Her attorney was actually named and still practices. He's a very renowned attorney, charges like $650 an hour. His name is Marshall Davis Brown, but there's no relation. It ends up that all the dirt comes out about her attorneys in this case. And Marshall Brown had some, I think there may have been felony or misdemeanor charges against him before he even got his law license,
Oh, really?
but still got his law license. And he tries to say, well, she knew that all about me before she hired me. But really, this is what he says in his deposition. I have a few quotes here. They want to know how it ended up that she had so many attorneys because it's this legal malpractice.
Yeah.
And he wants to know, the attorney suing this attorney, Marshall Brown, is asking, why is it that you only charged her $500 an hour instead of $650 an hour? And he waffles back and forth to say, well, I was charging $500 an hour, but then my fees went up after this case or during this case, or I was doing a favor. We never really got a straight answer. But his explanation is, why did you want to help her? Because I was just doing her a favor. He says, well, she was strapped for cash. And mind you, this is a woman that lives in a gazillion-dollar, She has a bunch of different Lamborghinis. Is this her? Not even something she drives. Her chauffeur's driver. She was
Yeah.
strapped for cash, like all rich women who don't work are, because
Mhm.
Michael Brown controlled the income. She had no money to pay her lawyers except for her initial stipend, which was, of course, $25,000 a
$10,000.
month.
Yeah.
She had been through, I don't know, 3 or 4 lawyers at the time. We had a history together. I had represented her before, and so I took a reduced rate of $500 an hour instead of $650 an hour. It
Mhm.
ends up that they were normal rates for the attorneys that she had. It wasn't just one; there was a number of them. It was about $700
And
an
then
hour.
this was back in what year?
This was in
2005?
2011 to 2013
Okay.
because Michael Brown died in 2013.
Oh.
This was a really short wick from the time that she filed divorce from him. Like I think the second or third time she filed in 2011, and he was dead by 2013. So they went from living high on the hog to he was dead and had been arrested, and there was
He was
many.
about to go to federal
He was
prison for 30
before
days.
for allegedly assaulting
Choking.
an airline a
Stewardess.
stewardess, and there was some, and even that there was some question about whether that really happened and whether there was just a lot of
Right.
money, and they were paid witnesses, and there was some. The reason these attorneys were saying that they needed their own crew on board when they went to go do depositions in Miami and paid for the big hotel suites and stuff is because they didn't trust that he wasn't paying people off, and then they needed their own bodyguards because they were afraid that he hired hitmen, and there was none of this came to fruition. It was
It's terrible.
really bad. They were I think that they were just using his money to on a vacation while they were doing depositions. All right. So he goes on to say, I first met Rachel Brown during what we call Rachel Brown 2. That was a motion to modify the divorce decree with his wife, Darlena Brown, in Conroe, Texas. His
Mhm.
lawyer, lawyers, 3 of them, put Rachel on the stand, and that's when I first met her. And he represented Darlena, his second wife, when he met Rachel. Rachel ended up hiring because she liked how he worked.
Mhm.
That wasn't the first attorney she hired, though. When she
Mhm.
filed for divorce, she actually hired an attorney named Jed Moffitt, who I've outworked. He was opposing counsel against me in some high-profile cases, and he kind of says, he wasn't a very nice guy, and she sued him too.
Yeah.
They did not go to mediation. He explained that only Conroe courts require mediation as a prerequisite. I'm not sure if that's true or not, but they in Conroe they do protect you in requiring mediation for temporary orders when you have when child custody is involved. So they demand that you go to mediation before you even have the temporary order hearing.
Right.
And so that kind of saved her because they ended up settling. They got back together after that mediation.
Oh, okay. Well,
So that was
time.
how they first met.
Poor
So
Michael.
Conroe has a good thing going where they force you into talking and maybe cooling down a little bit first.
Right.
She hires a whole slew of attorneys, and they go on to say that I guess the question was,
What
well,
was his thinking? Why did he charge her $11 million, and how did he justify that?
they say, well, in many cases, when the court finds fault on the part of one of the members of the union, they will find the gross community estate. They will apportion the fee of I'm quoting, the deposition by one of her attorneys, for lack of a better term, the innocent spouse, the person that did not cause the fault to the other side. In this case, we felt was Dr. Brown because of his bad acts. The lawyer's fees for himself and for Rachel would come out of his portion of the community estate.
So Brown was at fault, the guy is saying.
So their argument was, well, we knew that we were charged, all the money was going to be coming out of the community estate to pay us because she didn't have separate property. His separate property coming in was his separate property. But because we believed that there was so much in the community estate by the time they'd been married for this 7 years, that he would be at fault and would be paid. And so really most of his money came out of the separate estate, but that wasn't how they were arguing it to the court. And I'm looking at a 2,000-page pleading that was filed by the legal malpractice attorneys. It was a pleading the estate trying to, and I forgot what this one was called, but the deposition of several of our attorneys is in it. So if you want to see the inner logic behind your attorneys that you think are giving you a bad deal, go to the legal malpractice case because these attorneys talk about what their thought process is and why they charge the fees they do.
What's the case number for the legal malpractice case? Do you know?
Yes, I do. It is right here. They had also, if you go to their bankruptcy case, which is in the Southern District, and again, you can get access to that too. It talks about, she gets on the stand in her depositions in that case. It all comes out where she talks down about all of these attorneys, and kind of the attorneys turned on her at that point because the money was drying up because Michael Brown had declared bankruptcy and no money wasn't coming in anymore.
But how do attorneys turn on you because money dries up? I mean, I can see they're not going to represent you, or they want to withdraw, but turning on her?
All I can tell you is that in these particular depositions, they say that the attorneys, the malpractice attorneys, they ask specifically, how did you feel about, say, Jeff Bagwell? Well, I don't want to, and they literally say this. I'm paraphrasing, but it's quoted in here. I don't want to talk bad about, a local hero, Jeff Bagwell, but he showed up drunk to the bankruptcy proceedings, the divorce proceedings. She said it was all about the child custody battle, but how could it be about child custody when she's getting ready to marry somebody who was drunk even at legal proceedings? And we had to keep him out in the hall and keep him away from the bailiffs and the judges so they couldn't see.
Oh, wow.
Okay. And then they turned around and say that she lied on the stand time and time again. I don't want to say she didn't tell the truth, but when and they started talking about every time she lied. So they turned on her. Well, basically, she was suing them, and so they were talking down about her.
But they had gotten all this money for representing her, and they didn't even have one. I mean, they didn't do. You're saying they didn't
did not go to trial.
mediation?
They didn't have to prepare for trial. They had over 50 depositions, but mind you, a lot of these depositions were in Miami, and they were all paid for with their crew. They flew out there. They had bodyguards.
That's horrible.
This is really bad. But their justification was, we needed bodyguards because he threatened to kill us. But then they had in turn, they'd gotten the depositions or the statements from the prosecuting attorneys from the state saying, we never had any evidence that there was death threats by him to anybody.
Yeah.
So all the mud came out in this case. And so that's why I'm saying you really need to go to these cases.
So what's the case number?
The case number where Rachel Brown sues her attorneys is cause number 2014 17523 in the 61st Court of Harris County. And if you go in like you should, if you want to see what cause of action against you have against your attorneys,
right,
and what they all say about each other, because it all came out. Then go to this court and read from the beginning to the end. You want to go in date order and just read the proceedings. They're all in there. And she filed for divorce, and they were all buddy in 2011. And by 2014, the shit had hit the fan.
And
by 2014, she had filed suit against. Wow. Let me just all the depositions and the interrogatories are in there. She files it against Marshall Brown, her second lead attorney, Jedediah Moffett, her first lead attorney, and all his crew, Pavlis and Brown, her third lead attorney that was hired by Marshall Brown, who's his partner, who charges $7.50 an hour. She filed suit against all of the. It looks like the office of Robert Huffman, which I really like him a lot, and I think he was one of the better attorneys. I think he backed off, but anyway, he was one of her attorneys too. She filed suit against all of the experts that they had hired for her accounts, which countersued because they were still owed millions of dollars.
The experts?
The experts, because when they went to bankruptcy court, they were all trying to be the highest level in bankruptcy court, which is, and I don't have that number directly in front of me, but it's in the Southern District. If you just go Google Michael Brown bankruptcy, you'll get right to all these depositions and it'll all come out, and you want to follow it. Now, we're going to get to what we needed to talk about, which was your court-ordered spousal support and what I'm going to give you 3 tips on what you will get. You will get spousal support according to this case, and we watched it time and time again. It was a rubber stamp. She got spousal support just by her attorneys asking for it in this court in the 309th. And it may be partially because these were well-known attorneys. The judge respected them. It may be because they gave her huge campaign contributions. We don't know. But they went in and said, we want attorney's fees. And it was rubber stamped. And she got carte blanche, all her attorney's fees. And we're talking, the money was rolling in. Nobody was even, there was a chancery looking at it to make sure that she wasn't billed 51 hours for a 24-hour day, which she was, and that came out. But for the most part, they said, oh, that was just a clerical error. But what we're going to do is I'm going to go through and tell you the 3 tips that you need to know about spousal support. If in a legitimate case, you want spousal support, and you're not just getting it rubber stamped, you want to seek court-ordered spousal support in Texas. Don't quit your job or refuse to look for a suitable work, training, or education while the divorce is going on.
Right.
Of course, we know that she didn't do that, but normal people have to be looking for work. They can't just say, I want it. They have to be legitimately looking for it.
Right.
You can't just say, I want it because I had it before.
Mm-hmm.
Tip 2, when you're seeking court-ordered spousal support, don't try to be sneaky. Typically, you don't have somebody who's aligned with the judge as your attorney. You don't have a $100 million case.
Right.
The judge is going to see through your sneakiness, and it's going to come out. You want to be honest because
Well,
the court
what do
is
you
seeing
mean
it.
sneaky?
Family judges know every trick, every ruse, and they execute attorneys and parties. And parties used to try to get spousal support, they try to get spousal support by trying to show that they can't work. How do they do? They know that the spouse is going to say, I'm sick. They know that the spouse is going to say, I have too many kids and I can't find someone to watch my kids.
Right.
They know they're going to try to say, I was beaten or battered and he hurt me or whatever.
But a lot of times that's true, though.
It is, and that's not a trick. But they're going to see if it is a trick.
Right.
It's hard to make these things up and for it to stick.
Yeah.
If it's true, yes, by
Yeah.
all means, argue it.
Mhm.
You need that. You need to show that you've been abused and you need counseling and you need, perhaps you're on some kind of medication because of the PTSD that you're under and all that kind of thing.
Right.
But don't make it up.
Mm-hmm.
Don't
Right.
try to bring your friend in to say something happened when it didn't because they know all the tricks. All right. The amount of spousal support you get, they look at a lot of different things, what the financial resources are. They'll look at, of each party, one spouse's contribution, the age, the employment, the earning ability. The case that we're looking at has nothing to do with this because Rachel Brown never worked.
Right. And
We
she
don't know that
got-
she had any skill set.
Yeah, she got to stay in
And-
the mansion and have all the cars and all that
So
stuff.
none of this applied. Her big argument was there was family violence, but ultimately, while she was arguing this, he was acquitted of the family violence because what came out, and I watched this trial, was basically all he did was twist her arm and threw a humanitarian award at her. So yeah, and
Funny,
this
sad.
and even in this case, they badmouth Dick DeGuerin. I mean, these attorneys were actually saying, "Oh, he's the little DeGuerin. He's the one that really doesn't know what he's doing in family court." It's like they were so fun to read these depositions about how these attorneys talk bad about each other. Okay, but this is how we're going to talk briefly. And I don't know. Let me find out before I go through sort of the mechanics. Is the whole show over? Oh, okay. How much longer do we have?
10 minutes.
10 minutes. Good. So
Okay, so we've got 1 minute to
I'm going to
wrap
give
it
you
up.
this. We're
So
going
what
to
are we
go
gonna
to a
talk about?
roadmap of what was filed by these attorneys in the 2011 divorce case by Rachel against Michael Brown. She was allegedly the innocent injured spouse, and I say allegedly because in
Yeah.
hindsight, I'm not buying it.
Right.
But we're going to show you what was filed and what your attorney should be filing.
Right.
And even though they didn't do a great job for her in the sense that they should have mediated, they should have been representing that he was willing to make offers of $10 million, $30 million to sell off assets just to be done for confidentiality, and they didn't offer it. What they did do a lot of things that were right, and so we're going to talk about that.
Okay, well, we're going to take a quick break. Tony and I are talking about divorce, and when we come back, we'll wrap up the final segment on divorce.
Listen in Mondays at noon to hear Conroe news from local nonprofits, businesses, upcoming events, Conroe Park events, news stories, and information that matters to you with your host, Margie Taylor of Taylorized PR. For more information about being a guest, visit irlonestar.com/Conroe Culture.
Welcome back to The Legal Connection with Tony and Cheryl. Tony and I are here today talking about divorce. This is our fourth show on divorce. And we've been talking about the Rachel and Michael Brown divorce. And Tony is going to tell us what, Rachel Brown is the wife. She was the stay-at-home wife. Michael Brown was the surgeon, hand surgeon, but he had several other businesses. And so they got in the middle of this very expensive divorce. And so Tony's going to tell us some of the claims that Rachel Brown brought against Michael in the
initially.
divorce.
Right.
In the divorce.
In the first petition that she filed, it was a very simple, generic petition, just almost as though she was filing it just to sort of make a statement, like maybe she really didn't want to divorce him. And I've got the Fifth Amendment. I mean, it got amended. Like I think we talked about last show. There's 37 pages of single-spaced filings that were filed. 37 pages of, gosh, I don't even have it in
Of
front
the
of me.
divorce petition?
Of the divorce petition, if you look at it. I mean, I guess I have seen some that are that large, but not for this short period of time
Mhm.
between 2011 and 2015.
Mhm.
And I was going to show a picture of Rachel Brown and Michael Brown in Happier Days. And this is at one of their benefits. I want to say maybe it was 2010, not too long before the divorce. And this was one of the suits, and all of his suits were sold at auction. We actually ended up, my husband and I went to a lot of these auctions. The people that won in the long run were the attorneys and the people that bought their things at auction. And we went to the auctions, not just kind of blindly falling into it. And these suits, this was probably a $5,000 to $10,000 suit. We got it for $100, and we ended up going to the very same guy that tailors them, that made it for him, and he tailored it for us. And my husband wears it now, and I will say this: his suits were beautiful. We bought maybe 5. It's kind of weird to buy someone's suits, but they were like $100 for a $10,000 suit.
Oh, yeah, that's an expensive suit.
Yeah, it was amazing. So anyway, that being said, the first petition that she filed was just a plain old generic petition. She filed it in Harris County. They did live in the Woodlands, and so because he lived out here for a while. He had a number of houses, but they moved to, I don't know what was his transfer venue. Probably at a gorgeous house on Memorial. They ended up on Memorial Drive, where the hoity-toity area is, right off of the West Loop, in this massive mansion, and so that's why they had jurisdiction in Harris County.
Mhm.
The first suit was just against Michael Brown, and it ends up, as the attorney started going through his not his tax returns, but his bank records. And by the way, one of their arguments on why they had to charge her so much was that he never gave them an inventory, because he didn't want to give them an inventory because he had so much. So it was, I want to say a hat trick, but it was a game of hiding everything. Her second amended petition, after just a generic petition, when now all the guns were drawn and everybody was at each other's throat,
Right.
was not filed that long after the first one. And this is when the attorneys found out that it was one of the biggest divorces that they had ever filed. The money
So
involved.
what were the causes? Would she say?
Well, they started joining in as third parties: the Brown Medical Center, the Surgeons Management Center, the Superior Vehicle Leasing, the Hand Therapy Center, doing business as the Hand Center.
Right.
And so that was just like 4 or 5 of the 55 entities that he owned that ended up
Right.
being pulled into this. They named that they were married in 2002 and that they were separated in 2010. So it was
8 years.
just an 8-year marriage. But in between that, there were divorces being filed too that were canceled. So it was a little bit rocky along the way.
Right.
They filed for the 2 kids they have, Raquel, Mia, in 2004, and then his only son, Maxwell, in 2006. So he still has a very young son. So what they started filing against was conservatorship in support of the children. We all know that divorces only go for custody, child support, and division of the property.
Right.
Division of the community property was huge because they had to establish that what was community property. And that's very difficult because he made most of his money, her being the 4th wife, before they were married.
Then it's not that difficult. It should be kind of straightforward.
It should be, but that's not the way the attorneys were seeing it. When you're representing the spouse, it doesn't work. She said she went straight to Darlena's attorney, who she thought was aggressive, his 3rd wife, and said,
Right.
"You did a
said
good
that.
job.
Mhm.
I'm going to hire you."
Mhm.
And then she ended up that wasn't even her first choice. She hired Jedediah Moffett first, then
Who was a
hired.
recent graduate from law school.
Yeah, he was charging a fortune, but he had just graduated from South Texas in 2005.
See, I love that.
And he married his law school college
Sweetheart,
mate,
yeah.
who also graduated from South Texas.
Mhm.
And then they went to town representing her. Her second attorney, Marshall, said that he didn't make a deal with
Moffett.
Jedediah Moffett or Jed Moffett, that basically she came and hired him without telling Moffat. So that's part of the deal. You have a crew. She went and hired Moffat and then thought, this is over his head. I think I need to go get somebody. I'm going to go get a second person, who in turn hired a third set, who in turn hired experts to evaluate all of the properties and accountants who charge millions
So
of
in
dollars.
this divorce, they started bringing in all of these
Experts.
well, no, the businesses. They
Yes.
started bringing in the businesses.
Yes,
that
they started.
he had started long before they got married.
Right, right.
Okay.
And so, but their argument was because he had so much fault in the marriage, and he's bringing in, so much cash flow that we don't even touch the corpus of what he owns, and we'll get paid out of the cash flow. That's how much money he was making in all these businesses. But that's a terrible reason.
It's
I mean,
awful.
it should have been going back to the business.
It's
Instead,
awful.
the attorneys were just saying, we're going to make money off of what he's bringing in. The more they saw, the more they hired people out. And so their arguments were, for her benefit, fault in the breakup, fraud in the community, benefits to an innocent spouse, disparity of earning power, the spouse to whom the conservatorship of the children is granted, because he was already agreeing that I'm going to let you keep the kids. But in the long run, he was arguing for custody, and then she was arguing against custody, saying, oh, he abused me. Look, I've already made these claims. He's already claimed that, he's already got the deferred adjudication against him in the Conroe court. And now, look, he does drugs and he's got a felony. He's a bad person. The truth of the matter is he never had any violence in front of his kids whatsoever.
Yeah.
Nothing occurred in front of his kids. And so that
Well,
argument was
all
lame.
that happened was that he twisted her arm, or was there more violence?
There was no evidence of any trauma or violence whatsoever. And that's why
Wow.
he was acquitted in Harris County.
I see.
But he did agree to a deferred adjudication in Conroe. And then I think the two wives, Darlena and Rachel, got together and were able to show that he was addicted to cocaine, or had become addicted to cocaine, which wasn't that.
over the course of the divorce.
We don't know when he became addicted, but he did test positive and was adjudicated. So he was found guilty of a felony in the Conroe court.
In what year? Was
And
that?
I want to say it was in 2006. And so his medical license was pulled, but because he had so many doctors working under him, all these entities.
he didn't need his license.
He didn't need his license
Mhm.
anymore. But she used that. I think the two wives, using the same attorney, Marshall Brown, were able to kind of get together and go against him on this. And it kind of backfired. I mean, I think this guy really just loved women. There should definitely be a movie about this. Hopefully I'll get the rights, but maybe not. Anyway, all the arguments were she was the one, the needs of the children, because now they were used to so many nannies and all that, what were part of the reason she needed a lot more money. Community indebtedness, of course, they had to maintain the Florida residences, the mansions.
Well, I
the
read it
servants.
was like $100,000 a month they needed to maintain all of
Yes,
that.
yeah. Well, she ultimately, just off the top, I think by agreement, but I'm not sure how this came about because there was too much to read. She was getting $25,000 a month just to maintain the estate and keep the kids with their nannies and their private schools.
Right.
And mind you, these kids were young.
yeah.
She only had two kids with
They were
them, one in
little.
2004 and one in 2006.
And we're talking about she filed for divorce. Was it 2008?
Well, they got married in 2002, and
Right.
and in 2000, I want to say it was 1998. Her child Raquel was born in 1998, and in 2001, she was using the office of the Attorney General to get $300 a month in child support. So
had
she
no money.
she basically walked into this marriage with nothing.
Mhm.
And by 2004, she had her first child with him, and then 2006, his last child, Maxwell. And she was getting 25. But when she filed for divorce, by this time in 2011, she was getting $25,000 a month just in spousal support
2011. She was getting $25,000 a month in spousal support.
with a child that the only children that they had together
Were two.
at that time would have been 5 and 6 years old, 5 and 7 years old.
Right.
And she wasn't working, but you have to maintain your Lamborghinis and this is all in all this. There was just so much money on. So anyway, their argument was the tax consequences, the earning power of him, the need for future support because of her ability not to support herself now, the nature of the property involved, the wasting of the community assets by him, but they were really his assets. Community funds, gifts to or by a spouse during the marriage to other people.
Mhm.
They had to find all this stuff. And of course, it was going to cost a lot of money to have an attorney to look for all this stuff. So they were basically charging her for finding his assets to pay them.
Mhm.
So that was all they were doing because he wouldn't tell them. That's where all the
Mhm.
money was going.
Mhm.
So their claims were reimbursement. Their argument was Rachel needs the court to reimburse the community estate for funds or assets expended by the community estate for the benefit of Michael Brown and all of his entities that benefit his separate estate. So that was their argument for reimbursement. Now, mind you, that's a valid claim and a valuable claim
Yeah,
for
it's
people
pretty
where
standard.
you should get reimbursement when
Mhm.
there's a legitimate money of community property being spent
Mhm.
to a separate estate or from the community estate to a bad, a girlfriend or whoever it may be. That is a legitimate
A
argument. In this
brother.
case, I don't think that was really the case because of the timing.
Mhm.
There's something called a Jensen claim. Rachel Brown requests the court to reimburse the community estate for the value of time, the community time, toil, and effort expended by Michael Brown while they were married, well, that she was helping, in other words. That came about. It's called a Jensen claim because of a case called Jensen v. Jensen that we all know about,
Mhm.
where in law school, where it shows that the time, toil, and talent of the spouse that doesn't own the property is now giving toward it. So they should be reimbursed by the
Right.
community estate
Or the
because the
efforts
community
expended.
estate. But we already
Mhm.
know by all of the testimony, for the most part, she wasn't helping with his businesses.
Yeah.
So she was helping him with the kids, though. There is something to that, but how much for number of years they were married is kind of hard to say. We're talking $100 million. There was something called the TFC Section 3.402 claim, where the argument is the community estate has not been adequately compensated for the time, toll, and talent. And then they list his Superior Vehicle Leasing,
These
formerly
other
known
companies.
all his companies, the Surgeons Management Company, the Southwest Houston Hand Center, the Excalibur Industries, all these things that he had created. Now, this guy was a genius. He was a
Mhm.
doctor that had all these other entities.
Yeah.
Why don't all doctors have 5,000 entities that aren't related to their medical practice? I don't know. I don't
Well,
know
they're
how he
not
did all this.
geniuses.
And in a very short period of time, he died at 56, and so all this
Wow.
stuff was going on when he was
Wow.
fairly young. There was the there was the unsecured debt claim, where she requests reimbursement on the community estate for funds or assets expended by the community estate on things that she couldn't get back, like credit card, like traveling, and that kind of thing. There's the capital improvement claim. The community estate has expended funds or assets to make capital improvement on his separate property. The reduction of secured debt claim, where she's saying that that Michael Brown is or was obligated on debts incurred during the marriage for the acquisition of capital improvements to property and secured by liens on the property claimed by his separate property. So these are all where she's trying to get to his through a community argument to his separate estate. The Pierce corporate veil argument. Their big argument was he set up all these companies and was
Mhm.
moving all the assets from these
Mhm.
companies, like in
Mhm.
our other segments that we've talked about,
Mhm.
into other companies that he was creating
Mhm.
to get around the court orders, which he was, but he was really trying to get around the attorneys.
Right.
And if you go to this, you'll see that they acknowledged that he had about 55 entities that were making just a not a small fortune, a large fortune, something that these attorneys didn't even know when she walked in that he was making.
Wow.
Let's see. They go on, and I don't want to go too far into it other than to say that, because I want to jump over to her malpractice suit. All of these claims really were just so that she could, that the attorneys have already explained in their malpractice case from their own words, that they believed that the cash flow for the money that he was making was going to pay for their fees, and that they were never hitting the corpus, and that they knew that the community estate was worth quite a bit, and they saw this golden egg and were going after it. And Michael Brown, being the astute businessman that he is, wasn't having any part of it.
Right.
And so some of the motions that he filed were that she filed were an emergency motion to sell his property to fund the attorneys. And her arguments were he went and he bought property in Florida, which is actually property of the estate if he bought it during the marriage, that it's in her favor.
Sure.
But the attorneys wanted to make sure that they had the cash flow. So they had an emergency motion to sell personal property, emergency motion, a real property, emergency motions to inspect his airplanes, his cars. And then they list in the car category cars that, all kind of cars, limousines, Navigators, Escapes, Escalades.
And they wanted to inspect these things because they wanted to get the court to allow them to sell them.
They wanted to find out what their value was, but they also wanted to see that too. He had a Rolls Royce worth $240,000. The list goes on and on of the number of cars that he owned. But I will say that when we went, they were selling these all at auction, or many, many of them
Before he died.
before he died. And we actually bought one of his cars at auction, the 2009 Infiniti, that's listed here that he bought in 2010 for almost $47,000. We got it at auction in 2014 for $15,000, fully loaded in perfect condition.
Do you still have that
We
car?
still have the car. It still runs like a dream.
Yeah.
And all the music that he had that he listened to was on it. It was all really good music. It was nice. It was religious. We kept it on that. My son got the car. But anyway, so the people at auction and the attorneys got his assets. A ton of money went to these experts that will evaluate the corporations, because there were so many of them. He hired them. They had to pay them. The Greenberg tar rig is one. There was Janine McClure, which I've used a number of times. She was on the other side. He had to pay for all of them out of the money. There was a petitioner's motion for ruling on the payment for interim attorney's fees. This was filed so many times that I can't tell you how many times you see this, where they would just put in, they would list, and you get to see these so you can educate yourself what they were charging for. It was kind of bankrolled right
Okay,
there.
Tony. Well, listen, we're going to have to wrap this up. And so, what is the take-home message? I mean, we've been talking about this for 4 shows. This is our 4th one. And, what's the take-home message? I mean, get a good attorney or watch
The
out.
take-home message is, if you think your spouse is bad, they may not be nearly as bad as the professionals that
As
you
it could
hire
be.
to come in. Because once you get somebody, when there's a third wheel involved, like when
Mhm.
Princess Diana, and her little saying, when there's 3 people involved in a marriage, it gets bad.
Yeah.
When you set up for a divorce and you don't have somebody you can trust as your attorney, you
Yeah.
should be watching them, and you should get another attorney to watch them. But really be looking in it. Don't do what Rachel Brown did, where she said, just whatever it is,
I
the
don't wanna
court's going to
see
pay
it.
for it.
Right.
It really it makes my brow sweat if I even have to look at that. Please, my husband's going to pay for it. Your husband may ultimately, because he was the one that made the money, stop working, file for bankruptcy, and who's going to win is all the attorneys that made themselves as secured creditors. Creditors. They came in, and although they may not have gotten everything they wanted, they got a lot more than they should have.
Okay. All right, guys, have a great Christmas and New Year's. We will be back after the first of the year. And remember,
To serve God, and truly by serving others, not ripping them off.
right, that's true. Have a great holiday, guys. Thanks for listening.